The desert had a way of burying people before they were dead. By the summer of 1878, the Arizona frontier had become a graveyard of forgotten souls. Burned wagons half swallowed by sand, abandoned rail camps rotting beneath the sun, and widows praying to a god who no longer answered. The wind carried dust across the empty plains, like ashes from some old war, and every sunset painted the horizon the color of dried blood. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. The settlement outside Black Hollow was barely alive anymore. A few crooked buildings leaned against the desert wind, as if exhaustion itself held them upright. A saloon with shattered windows, a blacksmith shop that had not seen fire in weeks, empty water barrels sitting beside a dry well. Even the horses looked hungry there. At the edge of the settlement stood a weathered shack made from warped wood and old railroad scraps. That was where Elena Vargas lived with her children. The heat inside the shack was unbearable. Dust drifted through the cracks in the walls. Flies circled slowly through the still air. A rusted pan sat empty beside a cold stove. Elena pressed a damp cloth against her daughter's forehead, while trying to ignore the ache twisting through her own stomach. Little Rosa lay beneath a thin blanket, too weak to complain anymore. Her lips were dry, her cheeks pale beneath layers of dust. Beside her sat Mateo, only 10 years old, but already carrying the silence of a grown man. "I ain't hungry no more," Mateo whispered quietly. The lie broke Elena's heart, because she could hear the weakness in his voice. 2 days, 2 full days without food. Elena turned away, so the children would not see the tears forming in her eyes. She had promised herself after Diego's death that her children would never beg, never bow their heads, never become pitied by the same town her husband died protecting. But pride did not feed children. Outside, the afternoon sun scorched the earth without mercy. Elena wrapped a faded shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the desert wind. Her boots dragged through loose sand as she walked toward town, carrying an old silver necklace in her hand, the final thing Diego had ever given her. The streets of Black Hollow were alive with cruelty, disguised as normal life. White ranchers laughed outside the saloon, while Mexican laborers unloaded rail supplies beneath the sun. Like beasts of burden, deputies sat in the shade drinking whiskey, while children begged near the general store. Nobody looked at Elena directly, though he could feel their eyes following her. Some remembered Diego Vargas, most pretended not to. He had died 3 years earlier, defending a stagecoach from a gang of border outlaws, shot twice beside the river while protecting passengers, who later refused to even attend his burial. The town praised his courage. For 1 week before forgetting his family existed, now his widow walked those same streets starving. Elena entered the trading post slowly. The owner barely glanced up from his ledger. "What do you want?" She placed the silver necklace carefully onto the counter. "It belonged to my husband." The old man inspected it for bill. 2 seconds ain't worth much. "It's real silver, ain't much to mend for memories." Elena swallowed hard. "I only need enough for bread." The man leaned back in his chair, staring at her with tired indifference. "You people always need something." The words hit harder than a slap. For a moment, Elena almost grabbed the necklace and walked away. But then she pictured Rosa's trembling hands, Mateo pretending not to be hungry, and her pride finally broke beneath the weight of motherhood. Before she could even... But this stranger did not stare at her body, did not smile falsely, did not speak with pity. He simply untied a small cloth sack from his saddle and walked toward the children. Mateo stood protectively in front of Rosa. Despite his shaking legs, the cowboy crouched slowly before them. From the sack he removed apples, bread, dried meat, and a small tin of water. Rosa's eyes widened. Mateo stared silently, too stunned to move. The stranger finally spoke, his voice rough like gravel, worn smooth by years of silence. "No kids sleep hungry today." The words hung in the desert air like something sacred. Elena felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. For the first time in months, somebody looked at her children like human beings instead of burdens. The cowboy handed the food gently to Mateo before standing again. "What's your name?" Elena asked quietly. The man hesitated as though names carried weight. "Elias Reed." A gust of wind swept across the settlement, carrying dust around them in slow spirals. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled beyond the mountains. Elias looked toward the fading horizon, like a man debating whether to stay or disappear. Then Rosa smiled weakly while eating a small piece of bread, and something inside him shifted. Something he thought had died years ago. The desert remained silent around them, but for the first time in a long while, the silence no longer felt empty. The desert wind carried strange things through Black Hollow dust heat. the smell of dead cattle somewhere beyond the canyon trails, and now whispers by the following morning. Half the town had already begun talking about the mysterious cowboy who fed the Mexican widow's children in places like Black Hollow. Kindness was treated with more suspicion than violence. The sunrise came slowly over the Arizona frontier, spilling gold across the endless desert like melted brass. The old railroad tracks beside the settlement glimmered beneath the morning light, stretching toward nowhere. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed faintly across the mountains. Before vanishing into silence, outside the Vargas shack, Elena stood beside the rusted water pump, struggling to force movement from its stiff iron handle. Nothing came out, not even mud. Her arms trembled from exhaustion as she pushed harder. Sweat rolled down her neck beneath the growing heat. Then suddenly, a rough hand caught the handle gently. "Easy," a voice muttered. Elena turned sharply. Elias Reed stood beside her beneath the pale morning sun, his dark coat hanging loose around his shoulders. Dust still covered his boots from yesterday's ride. His horse waited nearby, calm and silent like its rider. "I didn't ask for help," Elena said coldly. "I know." Without another word, Elias crouched beside the broken pump and removed a small wrench from his saddlebag. Elena watched carefully, arms crossed tightly. Men always wanted something, especially men who acted quiet. The frontier had taught her that long ago. Elias removed the rusted side panel, slowly inspecting the cracked mechanism beneath. His hands were rough and scarred, the hands of a man who had survived hard years. "Seals broken," Elias murmured. "Pipes full of sand, too." "You know pumps, I know thirsty places." The answer lingered strangely between them. Elena stepped back while Elias walked beneath the growing heat. Mateo soon wandered outside, carrying a piece of stale bread from yesterday's food. The boy stopped instantly when he saw the cowboy. "You really cavalry?" Mateo asked carefully. Elias glanced upward briefly. Used to be. Matthew's eyes widened with admiration. "You fought Indians." The question darkened something inside Elias's expression. For a moment he said nothing, then quietly fought a lot of things. The silence that followed felt heavier than words. Elena noticed it immediately. She noticed the flicker of pain behind his eyes, the kind carried by men who had seen too much death. Before the conversation could continue, the water pump suddenly groaned loudly. Then muddy water burst upward. Mateo laughed in excitement. Rosa came stumbling from inside the shack, weak but smiling as cold droplets splashed across the dirt. For the first time in weeks, Elena heard her daughter laugh. The sound struck her harder than she expected. Elijah stepped away from the pump, quietly wiping grease from his hands. "There," he said simply. Elena stared at the flowing water, a tiny miracle in the middle of the desert. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "Maybe I did." The words unsettled her more than she cared to admit over the next several days. Elias remained near the settlement longer than he intended. Nobody understood why, perhaps not even Elias himself. He repaired the broken fence behind the shack beside Mateo. Beneath brutal afternoon heat, he bought medicine from a distant trading camp. When Moses's fever worsened, during the night he even patched holes in the roof before a desert storm rolled through the valley. And through it all, Elena watched him carefully waiting. Men did not help for free. Not in the West, not in her experience. One evening she found Elias sitting outside beneath the fading sunset, carving something from a small piece of wood with an old hunting knife. Rosa sat beside him wrapped in a blanket. Tiny curls of wood drifted into the wind as Elias worked silently. "What is it?" Rosa whispered. "You'll see." A few moments later, Elias handed her a small wooden bird with carefully carved wings. Walsh's tired face lit up with wonder. "It's beautiful." Elias nodded. "Once my mother used to call these." The statement slipped out unexpectedly, almost like a memory escaping, before he could stop it. Elena stood quietly in the doorway watching the scene unfold. The cowboy looked different beside the children, softer somehow, like the violence of the frontier had not completely destroyed the man underneath. But softness in the West rarely survived long. By the end of the week, the whispers around town became uglier. Elena felt them everywhere, at the market, at the water barrels. Outside the saloon, some waiters mocked Elias openly. "Now ain't enough women left in Texas," one drunken man sneered. Another waffed, "Careful, cowboy. Folks will think you belong with her kind." Elias ignored most of it, but not all, because every insult carried echoes of older memories. Memories of cavalry camps burning beneath cold skies. Memories of villages destroyed during frontier conflicts. Women crying beside smoke and blood. Children staring at soldiers with terror in their eyes. Elias had spent years trying to outrun those ghosts. But ghosts rode faster than horses one afternoon. Elena found him standing alone near the old railroad tracks, staring toward distant mountains. "You should stop helping us," she said quietly. Elias didn't turn around. "That what you want?" "No." The answer surprised even her. A warm wind swept across the desert between them. Elena stepped closer carefully. "But towns like this destroy people who don't belong." Elias finally looked at her then. "And you belong here." Her eyes hardened instantly. "My husband built half this settlement before the railroad came, yet they still look at you like an outsider." They looked at Diego the same way. Her voice lowered painfully until he died for them. Silence settled again, heavy, personal, dangerous. For the first time, Elijah saw the loneliness beneath Elena's strength, and Elena saw the exhaustion beneath his calm. That night, a cold desert wind rolled through Black Hollow after sunset. Elias built a small campfire beside the shack, while Mateo and Rosa slept inside. The stars above the frontier looked endless. A sky untouched by mercy. Elena sat across from him quietly, while firelight danced across their faces. "You carry yourself like a soldier," she said softly. Elias stared into the flames. "Used to be one. What happened?" For a long moment only the crackling fire answered. Then Elias finally spoke. "We burned a village north of New Mexico territory back in '71. His voice sounded hollow now. "Command said there were raiders hiding there, said it was necessary." Elena remained silent. Elias swallowed hard. "There were children there." The fire popped softly between them. I still hear him sometimes. His eyes stayed fixed on the flames as if afraid to look at her. I told myself I was following orders. His jaw tightened painfully. "Truth is, I stopped knowing the difference between right and wrong." Out there, the wind moved through the desert slowly. Elena studied him carefully. Most men bury guilt beneath whiskey or violence, but Elias carried his openly like punishment. "You saved my children," she whispered. Elijah shook his head faintly. "Doesn't erase anything," no, Elena replied softly. "But maybe it matters anyway." Those words hit him harder than bullets ever had. For the first time in years, someone looked at him without fear, without judgment, only understanding. The firelight reflected in Elena's dark eyes, while the desert stretched endlessly around them. Somewhere far beyond the mountains, thunder rolled through the night. Neither was the moved, neither wanted to break the silence, because deep down, both understood something terrifying had begun between them. Not love, not yet, but the dangerous beginning of trust. And in the Wild West, trust could save a soul or bury it forever. As the fire slowly died beneath the cold Arizona stars, Elias stared into the darkness beyond the camp. For years he had wandered from town to town, believing redemption was a road without an ending. But now beside a widow and 2 starving children, in a forgotten desert settlement, for the first time he wondered if maybe he had stopped wanting. That's my story. If it reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Some ghosts did not live in graveyards. They lived in silence and unfinished sentences, in the way a widow stared at an empty chair after sunset, and in the way a broken man looked away. Whenever somebody showed him kindness, the Arizona frontier grew colder. As autumn slowly crept across the desert, the heat still ruled the afternoons, but the nights carried a sharper wind, now dry and restless, sweeping through Black Hollow like whispers from the dead. By then, Elias Reed had become part of the Vargas family's daily life, without meaning to. Every morning before sunrise, Mateo followed him beyond the settlement, to gather loose firewood near the canyon trails. Elias taught the boy how to track water signs beneath dry riverbeds, how to calm nervous horses, and how to listen to the desert instead of fighting it. The desert warns folks before it kills them. Elias once told him quietly. Mateo admired him, with the fierce loyalty only children could give to the boy. Elias was more than a cowboy. He was the first man to stay. Elena noticed it all from a distance. The way Mateo laughed more freely now. The way Rosa waited each evening for Elias to return from town. Even the shack itself seemed less empty when he was near, and that frightened her more than loneliness ever had. One late afternoon, Elena stood outside, hanging washed clothes beneath the pale desert sun, while Elias repaired a loose wagon wheel nearby. The wind lifted strands of her dark hair across her face as she walked silently. Elias glanced toward her occasionally without meaning to. She looked stronger now, still tired, still carrying grief behind her eyes, but stronger. There was something dangerous about watching a wounded person slowly heal. It made hope feel possible, and hope had ruined many people in the West. "You keep staring like that," Elena said suddenly without turning around. "Folks will start another rumor. Elias smoked faintly while tightening the wagon bolts. Town already hates me, don't imagine it'll worsen much. Her lips almost curved into a smile almost, but then the smile vanished as quickly as it came. Because she remembered Diego, always Diego. The memory of her husband lingered everywhere, around the property and the broken stable fence he once built, in the old saddle hanging beside the doorway, in the silence after dark. That night after the children had fallen asleep, Elena finally spoke his name aloud again. The two of them sat outside beside a small lantern, while coyotes howled somewhere beyond the distant hills. Diego knew something before he died, she whispered. Elias looked toward her carefully. What kind of something? Elena hesitated. Fear still lived inside those memories. He found out some ranch owners were working with smugglers, near the border weapons, stolen cattle line and contracts. The lantern flickered softly between them. He told the sheriff. Elena nodded slowly. 3 days later, they found his body beside the river. Elias remained silent. Town called it a robbery. Her jaw tightened painfully. But Diego carried no money that night. Whoever killed him wanted something else buried. A cold breeze swept through the darkness. Elias stared toward the distant lights of Black Hollow. For days now, he had noticed strange movements around town. Armed riders arriving after midnight. Supply wagons moving without markings, deputies meeting privately with wealthy cattle owners near the rail station. And at the center of all of it stood Sheriff Walter Boone, a heavy man with dead eyes and the smile of somebody who enjoys kill. The following afternoon, Elias rode into town alone. Dust swirled behind his horse as he approached the saloon. Men stopped talking when he entered. Piano music faded awkwardly. Sheriff Boone sat near the back wall, drinking whiskey beside two ranch foremen. His eyes narrowed immediately. Yell, Boone muttered. Widow's protector finally wandered in. The Boone chuckled softly. Elias ignored it and stepped toward the ball. You asking questions about Vargas? Boone continued. No, then you're either stupid or lying. The sheriff stood slowly. Boone was the kind of man frontier towns created too often. Cool enough to survive, respectable enough to hide it behind a badge. You ought to white out a Black Hollow. Before you get tangled in business that ain't yours. Elias met it still evenly. Maybe folks get tired of being buried around here. The room fell silent for one dangerous second. The liars thought Boone might draw his revolver and bail instead. The sheriff smiled coldly. That widow sitting on valuable weight. Real-world expansions coming through an exploit. Some people stand to lose a lot of money if she refuses to leave. Elias understood immediately. This was never about prejudice or mold, it was greed. The railroad would transform the territory, and immigrant families living near the proposed route had become obstacles to powerful men. Diego Vargas had discovered the truth, and it had cost him his life that evening. Elias rode back through the desert beneath a crimson sunset. His expression remained hard the entire ride home, because now the danger surrounding Elena felt real organized. Deadly when he arrived at the shack.
He found Elena sitting alone outside.
While Rosa slept inside beside Mateo, the desert sky above them burned deep orange beneath gathering clouds. You were right, Elias said quietly. Elena looked up immediately. Her face tightened before he even spoke further. Boone. Elias nodded once he's involved. For a moment neither spoke. Then Elena closed her eyes slowly, as though hearing confirmation somehow hurt worse than uncertainty. I kept telling myself maybe I was wrong, she whispered. You weren't. The wind began rising stronger across the valley. Sand drifted across the ground in restless waves. Elena. Elias hesitated carefully. You and the kid should leave before this turns uglier. Oh, the answer came instantly. Elias frowned. You don't understand what these men. This was Diego's home, my children's home. Pain cracked through her voice. I buried my husband here. I survived hunger. Here I survived men staring at us like animals. Here tears filled her eyes angrily. I am tired of running. Elias stared at her silently. God help him, he admired her strength more than he should. The wind howled louder suddenly across the settlement. A wall of dust rose along the western horizon. Sandstorm inside, Elias warned quickly. But the storm moved faster than expected. Within minutes, violent winds swallowed the valley. Beneath clouds of swirling dust, visibility vanished almost entirely. Elias grabbed Rosa while Mateo held tightly to Elena's arm. As they pushed through the storm together. There's an old chapel nearby, Elias shouted through the wind. The abandoned mission church sat half buried beneath sand, outside town limits. Its wooden doors groaned violently as Elias forced them open. The family stumbled inside. Just before the storm consumed everything outside, darkness swallowed the chapel, except for pale moonlight, filtering through broken stained glass windows. Dust spiraled to the air like smoke. The children huddled together beneath old blankets, while Elias lit a lantern near the altar. For a long while only the storm spoke. The chapel creaked beneath the violent wind. Alia sat quietly near the wall, arms wrapped around herself, exhausted, broken, beautiful in the saddest way imaginable. Elias approached carefully. "You all right?" At first she nodded, then suddenly no. The word escaped like something very too long. Tears finally filled her eyes. "I'm tired, Elias," her voice trembled softly. "Tired of fighting for every piece of bread. Tired of burying people. Tired of waking up afraid every morning the storm roared outside." Alia lowered her head. "I don't want to survive anymore," she whispered painfully. "I want to live." Those words shattered something inside him. Elijah slowly knelt beside her, close enough to feel her trembling, close enough to smell dust and rain in her hair. For one suspended moment beneath the lantern light, neither looked away. The silence between them became intimate. Dangerous human, Alina's hand brushed against his. Elia closed his eyes briefly. God, he wanted peace, wanted warmth, wanted a life that did not smell like blood and gunpowder, and that terrified him because men like him destroy beautiful things. Slowly, Alina leaned closer, and Elia almost met her halfway almost, but then he pulled back first, breathing hard. "We can't," he muttered. Alina looked away, instantly wounded by the distance. Outside, the sandstorm screamed against the chapel walls, while thunder rolled across the frontier. Two lonely people sat inches apart in the darkness, mourning something neither believed they deserved. And somewhere beyond the storm, Black Hole awaited, silently watching, menacing, preparing. That was my story. If it reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Fire looked beautiful from far away. That was the cruelest thing about it. Against the cold black desert, flames danced like living gold beneath the Arizona night sky, twisting, breathing, devouring everything they touched, while the world stood helpless and watched. And on the northern edge of Black Hollow, the Vargas family stable burned like a funeral pyre. The smell reached Elena before the screams did. Smoke, burning wood, burning leather, burning memories. She jolted awake instantly. Outside the shack, orange light exploded across the darkness, while terrified horses shrieked against the fire. Madre Rosa cried from beneath the blankets. Elena rushed toward the doorway just as Mateo sprinted past her. "Barefoot into the night, Mateo," she screamed. But the boy was already running toward the stable. The fire roared violently beneath the desert wind. Flames climbed the wooden walls with terrifying speed, sending sparks twisting upward into the sky, like swarms of angry insects. Their old horse thundered wildly inside the collapsing structure. Trapped, panicked Mateo grabbed a water bucket desperately, though the effort was useless against a blaze that large. "El Caballo," he shouted, then he ran inside. Elena's heart stopped. No. She tried reaching the stable, but the heat forced her backward instantly. Smoke clawed at her lungs while burning beams cracked overhead. Then suddenly, a figure burst through the flames. Elias. He shoved past Elena without hesitation and disappeared directly into the inferno. The stable groaned violently. Inside, smoke swallowed everything. Mateo coughed violently while trying to untie the terrified horse. Flames crawled across the walls around him. Then a strong arm grabbed him. "Move!" Elias dragged the boy backward, just as part of the roof collapsed behind them. In an explosion of sparks, the horse burst free seconds later, galloping wildly into the desert night. Elias threw Mateo onto the dirt outside. Moments before the stable finally collapsed inward completely, the sound echoed across the valley like thunder. Alia fell beside her son instantly, clutching him against her chest, while tears streamed down her dust-covered face. Mateo trembled violently. Elias stood nearby, breathing heavily, soot covering his face and coat. Then he noticed something near the edge of the property. 3 mounted riders watching from the darkness. Sheriff Boone's men. They said nothing, did nothing. One of them tipped his hat mockingly. Before the riders disappeared back into the night, the message had been delivered. Leave or burn with everything else. Olivia stared at the collapsing stable with hollow eyes. Diego built that stable himself the summer Rosa was born. Every wooden plank carried memories. Now all of it turned to ash beneath the desert wind. "They want us to waste," she whispered. Her world sounded empty now. "Not here for worse, it's quiet." Wyaz clenched his jaw so tight he couldn't talk. For weeks he had tried avoiding violence, tried convincing himself the town could still be reasonable. But if you watch the flame, you can see the various problems. That is the cold frontier stars. Something old and dangerous is waiting inside of it. The next evening, Wyatt rode into Black Hollow, carrying fury like a loaded elephant. Duck followed behind his horse through the empty streets. While townsfolk quietly stepped aside, even the saloon music faded from the empty streets. Sheriff Walter Boone sat near the poker table, speaking wistfully beside several deputies. The sheriff smiled at the moment. Saw it well now, Boone muttered. A cowboy looks upset, oh yes. Walked directly toward him in Buntock's stable. Two men back calmly a council of accusations. Two in danger of children. A room became silent. Every man inside understood violence that only seconds away. You think you're some righteous man? Now the sheriff's in you, attacking widows and children to wash blood off your hands. I know who you are, why it's free. Awards goes to the world. A fort-standing Cowboy edition special frontier operations. Villages born across New Mexico territory. You ain't no hero. You're just another killer too ashamed to admit you enjoyed it. The accusation struck like a bomb because deep inside, a liar feared it might be true. A silent walk silently. The years of buried guilt rose behind his eyes. That widow thinks you're saving your family. Truth is men like you only know how to destroy things. Don't scrub the moon virus trying to outrun. Then suddenly he released Boone. The sheriff laughed coldly while straightening his coat. There he is, Boone mocked softly, the real Elias Reed. Humiliation and rage burned through Elias. As he stormed from the saloon into the cold desert evening, outside sunset bled red across the horizon, and for the first time since arriving in Black Hollow, Elias wondered if he truly was beyond redemption. Back at the shack, Elena stood inside Diego's old workshop, holding a rusted iron box she had not touched in years. Her hands trembled slightly. Inside the box rested ledgers, letters, and folded railroad maps Diego hid before his death. Evidence. She opened the first ledger slowly beneath lantern light. Names, payments, land transfers, Sheriff Boone, railroad investors, cattle syndicates operating beside the border, illegal smuggling routes marked carefully across the territory. Elena's breathing slowed. Diego had known everything, and he died trying to expose it. Rosa slept quietly nearby while Mateo sat beside the doorway, sharpening a small knife Elias gave him earlier that week. You scared? Elena asked softly. Mateo looked up. Yes. His honesty broke her heart, but I ain't running. Elena stared at her son silently. In that moment she saw Diego. Inside him the same stubborn courage, the same dangerous loyalty. Outside wind moved softly through the dark desert, then suddenly, horse hooves fast, too fast. Elias appeared outside instantly, revolver already drawn. Elena, but it was too late. Gunshots shattered the night. Windows exploded inward. Masked riders stormed the property from the darkness. Boone's men get down, Elias Ward. Chaos erupted. Rosa screamed while bullets whipped through the shack walls. Elias fired back from behind a water barrel. As horses thundered across the yard, one rider grabbed Mateo violently. Madre Elena lunged toward him, but another gunshot forced her backward. The rider dragged Mateo onto horseback. While the boy fought desperately, Elena. Then the gang disappeared into the desert. Night gone, only dust remained behind them. For several seconds, silence consumed everything. Elena stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to think. Then finally, a sound escaped her throat unlike anything Elias had ever heard before. Not a scream, not crying. Something deeper, the sound of a mother breaking. Elias grabbed horse reins instantly. We can still catch him. Elena wiped tears violently from her face. Fear vanished from her eyes, now only fury remained. She loaded Diego's old rifle with shaking hands. They took my son, she whispered. The desert wind howled across the valley, while firelight from the ruined stable still smoldered faintly in the distance. Elia stared at her carefully, and for the first time he no longer saw a grieving widow. He saw a woman preparing for war. Together they mounted their horses beneath the cold Arizona moon. Ahead of them stretched endless canyon trails, outlaw territory. From the growing darkness of Black Hollow's corruption, behind them the bone stable crackled softly beneath the night wind, like the final remains of a dying life, and some will fall beyond the desert hills. The tail of Vulgus wavered in the hands of monsters, Elias tightened the winds, and the two riders disappeared into the darkness together, chasing the thin and violent line between justice and revenge. The desert had no mercy for riders chasing justice, only for riders chasing something worse. By the time Elias and Elena crossed into Blood Canyon, the night had already swallowed the horizon. The moon hung low above the cliffs, like a pale witness to everything men tried to bury. Wind cut through the narrow rock passage, dragging sand along the canyon floor like scraping bones. Somewhere ahead, Mateo was still alive, or what was left of him, If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. They rode hard through broken terrain, where the canyon walls tightened like a closing fist. Elias led the way, but Elena never lagged behind. The widow who once could barely stand in a starving settlement now rode with a rifle strapped across her back, eyes fixed forward like steel forged in grief. Grief had changed her turned softness into something sharper. A mile ahead, faint torchlight flickered near an abandoned mining outpost. Carved into the canyon wall, wooden scaffolds hung like skeleton ribs above dark tunnels. Elias raised his hand. Boone's men, he muttered. Elena's jaw tightened. How many? Too many for a straight fight. She didn't hesitate. Then we don't fight straight. That was when Elias truly looked at her. Not as a widow anymore, not as a woman he was protecting, but as someone standing beside him in the same war. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Respect and something heavier. They dismounted near a ridge and moved on foot, staying low against the rock shadows. Voices drifted from the mine entrance. Rough laughter, whiskey talk. The careless sound of men who believe themselves untouchable. Inside the outpost, Boone stood near a fire pit. My tail was tied to a wooden post, bruised, breathing alive. Elena froze for half a second that felt like eternity. Then Elias touched her arm. Wait, he whispered. But waiting was not something Elias had left inside her. She stepped forward into the open. Let him go, she shouted. The canyon echoed her voice like thunder rebounding off stone. Boone turned slowly and smiled. Well, he said coldly. The widow bought her ghost and her cowboy. Elias stepped beside her, revolver drawn. Boone's men raised their weapons for a moment. The canyon held its breath. Then Boone spoke again, quieter this time. You still don't know the truth, do you? Elijah didn't answer, but Mateo did. They killed my father, he said weakly. Elijah's heart stopped. Boone tilted his head. Oh, he told you that. He laughed softly. Half-truth, boy. The wire stepped forward. Shut your mouth. But Boone only smiled wider. I didn't just order it, he said slowly. Savory every word. I was there when Diego Vargas begged for his life. The canyon seemed to collapse inward. A wire staggered slightly. No, she whispered. Boone continued. He thought exposing us made him a hero. Turns out heroes die the same as fools. Matilda began shaking violently. A wire snapped. Something inside him broke clean. He charged. Gunfire exploded instantly. The key and walked it into chaos. Gunshots ricocheting off stone. Sparks flashing in the dark. Horses screamed in the distance as outlaws poured from the mine. A Wyatt moved like a man no longer interested in survival. Only ending, he fought through smoke and firework. Taking down 2 rooms men before they could even eat properly. The wire didn't work. She fell beside it. Wipe her steady breath, control every shot precise. Not a victim, not even close. Inside the chaos, Boone dragged Mateo closer to the mine. Using his cover, Elena, Mateo shouted that ghost changed everything. Elena fired once, missed twice closer. Then Boone struck Mateo across the face, holding up to silence the chaos for half a second. Something inside a wire snapped completely. He reached the moon in seconds, slamming against the wall. This great shaking uncontrolled bridge? This ends now, the wild world? Go on, he whispered. Be what you are. Why are you always? Because Boone wasn't lying. Not a tire behind it. A woman appeared, gone with the wind, but her voice said, Why are you? He didn't talk, don't she said. So the world had horrible thoughts. The wire stood there pointing at heaven, and everything inside him screamed for vengeance, for justice, for silence, for an end, but then he could not hear it. A week, a while. A hole for his mother, and that brought the rage clean. The wire released. Boom, slow like when he goes. Something poisonous, boom. Whacked even as he was dragged off. Like your weak, respect the wire. Second thought, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to prove himself. The wire stepped forward, tied both hands to his cell. No hesitation, no remorse, but no worry, boom. Elena dropped to her knees, instantly pulling him into her arms. Like the desert itself might take him again if she loosened her grip. I've got you, she whispered. I've got you, Mateo sobbed into her shoulder. Elias stood nearby, watching silently. Something inside him shifted, not healed, but changed. When dawn approached, they rode back through Blood Canyon. With Boone bound and tied to a spare horse, the sky began to lighten slowly, gray turning into pale gold across the jagged cliffs. At the canyon exit, they passed broken wagons and old graves, remnants of men who chose greed over restraint. The town of Black Hollow appeared in the distance, like a scar waiting to be reopened. When they arrived, word spread faster than gunfire. Sheriff Boone captured alive. The man who had ruled through fear, now dragged through his own streets in chains. Some townsfolk stayed silent. Some looked away, others shouted insults at Elena, still clinging to old hatred like it was law. But for the first time, some also watched Boone with uncertainty, like they were finally seeing rot beneath the badge. Elias stood in the center of the street, as dawn light cut across his face, blood on his hands not from killing but from refusing to. Elena stood beside him, still trembling, still strong, still standing, and for a brief moment in that broken frontier town, justice didn't look like revenge. It looked like survival without becoming the thing you feared. The wind moved through Black Hollow gently now, as if even the desert was listening. That was my story. The desert never truly forgets what it takes. But sometimes if you stay long enough, it learns how to give something back. Weeks passed after the arrest of Sheriff Boone, and Black Hollow no longer felt like the same town that once burned. With silence and fear, the iron grip that had held it down for years was gone, replaced by something fragile and uncertain, like a man learning to breathe after being underwater too long. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. The railroad company sent officials from the east, men in clean coats and sharp eyes, carrying documents that rewrote ownership lines drawn in greed. After long investigations, Elena Vargas was officially recognized as the rightful owner of her land, the same land her husband died protecting, the same land people once tried to erase her from. Now, for the first time in years, her name was spoken in the town without shame, but respect in the Wild West does not grow easily. It must be earned from the same soil that once tried to bury you, and Elena Vargas had already been buried once before. The rebuilding began slowly. Immigrant families returned from hiding, their wagons creaking across the dusty roads. Broken fences were repaired. Burned structures were replaced with new wood cut from distant hills. Even the air felt different, less heavy, less afraid, as if the desert itself was exhaling after holding its breath. For too long, children played near the edges of rebuilt homes. Men who once worked in silence now spoke cautiously again, as if unsure whether their voices were allowed to exist. And at the center of it all stood Elena, no longer starving, no longer invisible, but still carrying everything she had survived in her eyes. Elias Reed watched it all from a distance. He did not belong here. That belief had settled inside him, like dust that refused to leave his lungs. The man who once rode without direction now found himself standing still too long in one place, and stillness was something he had never learned to trust. He stood outside the rebuilt Vargas home one late afternoon, while Mateo hammered wood beams nearby. Stronger now than before, Rosa ran across the yard laughing, a sound that once felt impossible in this place. Elias felt something tighten inside his chest as he watched them. Not pain, not guilt, something quieter, something heavier, belonging, and that was what frightened him most. That night he made his decision. He would leave before morning, before the town learned to depend on him, before Elena looked at him. The way people look at something they were afraid to lose, it's because Elias Reed knew one truth. Better than most men of his time, everything he stayed near eventually broke. The desert wind carried through Black Hollow that night. Soft and restless, we entered a spring low distance. The sky stretched wide and endless above the window. Town stars scattered in forgotten corners. The wise packed quietly outside his small ball of room. Saddle white one coat. The life of a man who never stayed long enough to be remembered, but to tighten the saddle straps. A boy stopped him, giving again. A tail stood behind him, no angle, no feet, only truth, a wise person. The boy was taller and stronger, the kind of strength born from surviving things no child should survive. I thought you were sweet a liar, said a liar. I watched the tail of a liar, then I saw your horse. I was stretched between the desert and the whistle. Every good man leaves Hawaii, said Fire, not looking at him. The tail stepped closer. Why? That question comes deeper than anything Boone had ever said. Wise didn't answer immediately, because he didn't know how. Because every answer he had ever believed, it no longer felt solid. Men like me don't stay, Wise finally said. Mateo shook his head. That's not true. Wise turned away slightly. But the boy didn't stop. My father's dead, but he also said softly, even when it killed him, the woods froze the air. Wise felt something crack inside his chest. Not loud, not violent, but slow like stone breaking under its own weight. Behind the footsteps approached. She stood at the edge of the yard, wrapped in a shawl. He had moved gently in the night wind. Her presence alone shifted the entire space between them. She had hold everything. Of course she had a winner. Stepped the horse on. You think staying would destroy her? She said quietly. Wise didn't deny it because part of them believed it, only looked at him to rest. Not as a widow, not as a victim of war, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself from nothing. You already saved us, she continued. More than once, a lawyer shook his head slightly. I brought violence here, no? Violence was already here. He just refused to look away from it. Violence wrong. Rebuild settlement carrying the smell of wood. Earth and distant firewood smoke. Elena stepped closer. You think healing is about leaving things behind? She said softly, but it's not. Elias finally met her eyes for the first time. He did not see fear there, only truth. Healing is choosing what you become. After everything tried to break you, she said. Those words settled into him like something long missing. Finally returning home, Mateo watched quietly, waiting. Not pushing, not pleading, just hoping. Elias looked down at his hands. Hands that had carried rifles, built fences, buried guilt, and tried endlessly to outrun memory itself. Then he looked at the family in front of him. Not broken anymore, not starving. Alive because he stayed, because he tried. Because somehow, against everything he believed about himself, he had mattered here. The desert wind softened, even the night felt different now. Elias slowly loosened the saddle strap he had tightened moments before. Then he stopped and tied it again, but not for leaving, for staying. Elena exhaled quietly, a breath she didn't realize she was holding. No celebration, no grand moment, just understanding, the kind that changes a life without needing to announce itself. Dawn came slowly over Black Hollow. Soft gold light spilled across the rebuilt town, touching Woodstone and hope like a blessing earned rather than given. Outside the Vargas home, a small table had been set, bread, fresh water, simple food. Not starvation, not survival. Something new living. Elena sat with Mateo on one side and Rosa on the other. Elias sat across from them, unsure exactly where he belonged until Mateo pushed a cup toward him. Without saying a word, Rosa laughed softly at something only children understood. Elena watched Elena for a long moment. Then quietly she smiled. Not the smile of someone healed completely, but someone willing to begin. Above them, birds circled slowly in the morning sky. The desert wind moved gently through the settlement now. No longer harsh, just present. As if the land itself had decided to stay too. The same desert that once symbolized hunger now carried the smell of bread. The same horizon that once meant endings now looked like a beginning. And for the first time since everything began, no one at that table was hungry and no one was alone. That was my story if it reached you. Tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And tell me where in the world you're listening from.